Thank you. What I'd like to do, start off with, and appreciate all y'all that have shown up, is a couple of things. One is to go over and explain what the meeting or the presentation is for today. And the other to talk a little bit about the guiding principles that are really guiding what we do and is backbone really of why we're making this proposal. So what I want to talk about tonight are the challenges the district is facing that causes us to be looking at a proposed ballot measure. Also, I want to talk about some of the opportunities that have been presented to us and how we're acting on those opportunities. And then, of course, to describe the ballot measures that we're proposing, and then also describe the impacts of either the passage or the failure of those ballot measures and what that all means. And of course, answer any questions. So we will have some handouts at the end of the meeting. Be glad to hand those out afterwards. But what's really guiding us is basically four different principles that we use in our planning process and executing those plans. And it's an understanding or a base, if you will. And the first one is the recognition that we are a combination fire department. People are the most important part of our organization. And our organization built from a combination of career and volunteer staff. The roots of our organization come from the volunteers, but as we'll talk in a little bit, that is changing to a large degree. Also, our organization wants to be accountable and transparent to its members, to its stakeholders, to our public. And again, this discussion is part of that.
Chief just went on mute.
Yeah, Chief she's on mute. Got it.
Sorry, thank you.
Am I okay now?
You're okay.
Thank you. Anyway, so again, trying to explain our challenges, our opportunities, ballot, and what the ballot measures are and what the impacts for those would be. Again, the four guiding principles are that we are a combination fire department. We are accountable and transparent to our stakeholders, and the community drives the service levels, as we will talk more about. And obviously, the community is involved with any financial decisions, which of course ballot measures are. So one of the things that we are celebrating this year is the 70th anniversary of the district, and it's actually two districts. In 2014, District 7 merged into District 8 and created one department that basically covers the whole north end of the urban growth management area. This is the old District 8. This is the old District 7 here. Since that time in 1953, when both organizations were founded, a lot of things have changed. We've gone from a totally neighbor-based system of neighbors helping their neighbors, having very little money. In fact, the money, there was very little tax money involved. It was all money raised through funding that they did for dances, and they did slave auctions and all sorts of things. But a very simple approach, very low number of volume of calls, and very low community exposure. And then obviously over the years, that changes to the point to where now we're serving over 13,000 people, and we have over 1,300 calls a year in a wide variety, frankly, most of them being emergency medical in nature. So what we do is we try to strive for high levels of service, and we do that through a program that is proactive, logical, and hopefully, again, engenders involvement from everybody. We have a working master plan that includes a mission statement, which is up on the screen there. And again, basically describes what it is that we do. And we have a vision, which describes basically how we do what our mission says. We do it basically through 2 strategically located fire stations, one at North Olympia and one currently here at South Bay. We do have a non-staff station out on Johnson Point as well. But we do it with round-the-clock staffing versus what used to be firing the siren on the firehouse off and everybody come running. Now, our responders are based at each of the 2 fire stations. And we have competent responders, whether they're career or volunteer, they essentially go through the same training process and are expected to have the same competencies in delivering both fire suppression and emergency medical services. And then obviously we need good people, but we need good equipment to do that work with too. So part of the vision is having appropriate equipment, vehicles, and facilities for those people to work with. So in our master planning process, we have, from our vision and mission, we have developed an annual goals and objective statement. And the 2023 goals that we are working on basically are continuing to work on our staffing plan, which was frankly the reason that we are looking at the proposal of increasing potential sources of revenue, the financial plan that will do that for us. And then the third goal that we have this year is working with our people, ensuring that they are competent, they are getting good training, and that they are delivering good service. So those are our 3 goals for this year. These are all, again, part of an overall master planning process that we've done basically since we merged in 2014. The first one we looked at was staffing to see how many people could we, in reality, organize and manage and need to provide this service. And that was quite a bit of work. It took about 1.5 years, 2 years to really get down to see that. And essentially it boiled down to the fact that we believe that we can do it from basic 2 different locations within the current district, and having enough people to essentially staff at both locations. We had to look at how do we house the people, where do we put the fire stations and everything. So we have a master plan that says where our fire stations ultimately will need to be. And the North Olympia station and South Bay one aren't in exactly the right spot, but again, this is something over time that we'll continue to work on only after we're able to have a very stable staffing structure. There's no sense in building new fire stations if we don't have a stable staffing structure, and that's exactly what we're working on. And then the third was making sure that those responders have everything that they need, going back again to the training, the equipment, the housing, and the vehicles necessary to do their job. So it was a tiered approach. It was something that we had worked on over 3 years or so. And in 2017 and 2018, we finally approved it and actually are in steps implementing it. And again, this is part of that work that we have planned. So a big piece of that and a big piece of the measurement, as you saw in our mission statement, was what we call target levels of service. And these are measurements that we use as a benchmark for the service we want to provide to the community. And so, as you can see on the screen there, our benchmark or target level of service for EMS functions is having at least 2 EMTs respond and begin basic life support within 8 minutes of having received the call. We have a similar one for fires, which is having 4 firefighters respond to the scene and begin firefighting operations within 10 minutes. So this is the service level that we measure, that we have set and we measure. Every month I report our achievement of that to our board. And again, it's something that we measure and want to continue to improve on. Other important things that that we are working with and for are other benchmarks For example, in Washington State, there is a rating system called the Public Protection Classification System that is run by an organization called Washington Survey and Rating Bureau. And they provide recommendations to fire insurance companies on the fire preparedness rating of a fire department. And it's a generally accepted standard and frankly is used statewide. Actually, it's a version of it's used nationwide. But there are 10 different classifications, from 1 being literally the best to 10 literally being no fire department at all. And in the last few years, we have been able to work to achieve higher and higher levels of classification. And 2 years ago, we were awarded a class 3, which is really very good for a small combination fire department like us. Just to let you know, the city of Olympia is class 2. So we're very proud of that. And what we want to do is maintain that as long as we can, obviously to the benefit of all you that pay for fire insurance. Hopefully those premiums will be lower because of that. We also work very hard at our EMS standards and everything on what service we're providing, the equipment that we have, and we have been very closely associated with other countywide efforts through the Thursday County Medic One. In fact, several of our folks are either on committees, boards, or involved in the training through Medic One as well. So I want to talk a bit about the challenges. One of the things is our service workload. And as you might imagine, the numbers of calls, like I mentioned, have increased, but the severity and the complexity of all of those have increased as well. These blue bars show EMS types of calls. The yellow bar here are the actual fire type events that we have, and the red are those other types of events that it conclude, like service calls or down power lines, things. I'll have copies of these slides when we get done too. So you don't need to take notes necessarily. But anyway, you can see that there's been a steady increase, and this reflects countywide and industry-wide the growing nature of the business that we have. And interestingly enough, it's grown to a point to where we're having issues with calls happening at the same time, meaning that we're getting 2 and possibly 3 calls that happen at the same time that require us to have more than 1 crew or ask for mutual aid, which we do in both cases. But as of last year, about 20% of our calls were concurrent. That shows an extra demand that really this graph doesn't show. So if you change the slide, I mentioned target levels of service. And so we do measure those, and it is an indicator to us our ability to do our mission either for fires or for EMS. And even though these bounce around a bit, you can see that our capability of achieving our target levels of service for fire are fairly good. The part of that is the fact that there are smaller numbers of them. So it's easier to make changes when you have small numbers. The EMS is a different picture. As you remember, the bars on that other chart is 70 to 80% of our calls. And we're struggling because of those things that I just talked about, where we have concurrent calls, we have more of them. And then the length of calls are taking longer. Our problems, even to deliver a patient at the hospital, where we may be sitting there for extended periods of time, all affect all of this. And you can see there's a bit of a trend degrading our ability to meet our target levels of service for EMS. These are one of the things that cause us to pay attention to that and hopefully try to do things that will help correct that. Other things that are changing are our community risk and demographics. Again, our population's getting older. The types of calls that we have are changing. Because of that, our calls are becoming more complex. We're dealing with things that were never even conceived of 15, 20 years ago. We're dealing with a growing number of, frankly, non-medical, non-traumatic calls that are behaviorally health related that we're having to deal with. Even in our community, we have a growing number of events that we need to do with doing that. It's placing a stress on our staff and our organization. We also have, like every other organization, staffing issues. And as I mentioned earlier, both North Olympia and South Bay originated as a totally volunteer organization and thrived for many, many years that way. But the picture is changing. Yeah, the picture is changing. The green line here shows our average staffing for volunteers over the last 10 years or so. The purple one is showing the career staff. And we've had modest increases in that. We've had to do that mainly because of the fact of the dips that we're experiencing in our volunteer staff. Our volunteer staff will not go away. We are continuing to do all of the efforts we possibly can to attract and retain good qualified volunteers. But frankly, the very nature of a volunteer anymore has changed a lot. We don't get a long-term community-based volunteer who's here for 20 years like we used to. Frankly, most of our volunteers are folks that have an interest in getting into the career side, and this is an excellent way of doing it. We'll bring the volunteer in, train them, give them some experience, and gives them a good resume that they can go out and get a job in a career fire department. And several of our volunteers have. Several of our career staff were volunteers that did that as well. So, but it's a fact of life. It's something that we were frustrated about for a long time, and we finally decided that we'll take the bull by the horns, accept it, and then work our volunteer staffing program around that and try to manage. So anyway, this is a real stressor for us, and it's getting worse. We have, again, shorter periods of time that they are with us. Our average volunteer is here from 3 to 5 years at best. It takes them about a year to get fully spun up, to get the training in the fire and the EMS before we can really deploy them. So what this graph doesn't show is that type of a stress that we have. And then the rising costs. So 70 to 80% of our cost in our operating budget now is related to labor costs. So as you can probably assume, volunteers the individual volunteer isn't quite as expensive as a career staff, where they're here full time. We're paying competitive wage to recruit and retain people. There's benefits and everything involved there. So it's much more expensive to have a career person, but as you can see, our dependency on them is growing and growing. So this again creates a financial issue for us that we're having to deal with. So the opportunities that we're taking, trying to address all of this, is that we worked very hard in the last couple of years to look and decide and develop 4 budget-based scenarios. And what we have decided and designed was staffing levels that were based on what we could expect to receive for revenue to pay for it, and decided and calculated what that would translate in the service that we could provide. I mean, obviously, you can't get free service. I mean, so you get what you pay for, and if we want a certain level of service, it costs a certain level. If there's labor costs, equipment, operations, and everything. And then, so we reverse engineered that and developed 4 different scenarios that reflect different budget levels. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. So we did that. And then we have also worked very hard in trying to not forget, it's not just labor, but we need to make sure that we continue to maintain funding for operations and maintenance, to pay for and maintain the buildings that y'all have bought for us, the equipment that we need, vehicles, and then pay the phone bill, the light bill, buy diesel fuel, and all of those other things. And the fact that for the last 15 years, we have self-funded our capital expenditures. We have saved money aside in a fund to pay for replacing apparatus, for equipment, and all sorts of stuff for, like I say, apparatus, vehicle, equipment, and facilities. And we've done that through the fund that we have funded for that. And we haven't relied on general obligation bonds for that. And the other thing that we've tried to do to help get some economic benefit is work very closely with our neighbors. And we've worked with our neighboring agencies, Lacey and Olympia, both for operations and training. We work very hard with the Medic One. We work very closely with the countywide training program, both for new firefighters and ongoing skills maintenance training for firefighters and EMTs. And all of this is help standardize how we can work with our neighbors and work seamlessly in the event that we need help. Our folks can be working in the same way, using the same tools, using the same practices and so forth. And we can do the same for them. And we spend the balance of trade, if you will, is we actually spend as much time providing service to our neighbors as they provide to us, which is truly mutual aid, is what it's called. The other thing that we have been working on recently is better community outreach. And again, this meeting today is hopefully an example of that, but we've actually gone and we have established internal committees that are working with our members, with the public, and with our schools and so forth. We're calling it a community outreach team. And we're very proud of that because it's something we've been working on for a long time trying to get. And again, this is to sincerely help our citizens be better prepared in the event of an emergency, to try to prevent accidents in the home, and to understand better how we do our business so that we can better serve them. So this is an initiative that I'm very excited about that we're continuing to work on. So what I want to talk about now is the proposed ballot measure. And what we're looking at is two of them, actually. We're going to talk about a ballot measure they're proposing for this year at the primary election in August for what was known as a levy restoration, or taking the levy rate that you all pay in your property taxes and increasing it back to what the total level is. This year, if you want to, this year, what we're looking at is we're paying the average taxpayer for a $590,000 home is paying about $708 a year. That's at a levy rate of $1.20 per $1,000 of assessed valuation of your home. What we're proposing is that with the levy restoration from $1.20 to $1.50, if the voters approve that, the cost of the taxpayer for that same home would be $885. And that would go towards trying to stabilize funding for what we just described for the things that we're trying to do. In addition, this money doesn't get us to the point to where we can fully staff consistently the 2 fire stations that we operate from. And in order to bring us up to full staffing, which is what we're calling at basically 2 fire stations, we believe that we need to ask for voter approval in 2024, not this year, but next year, the year after next, for what's known as an excess levy. And then that would bring in about another 45 cents per thousand, or create a total tax bill in 25 for $1,151. Now, with that, over time, as the total values within the district increase, which they normally do, it's an average, our average assessed value throughout the whole district is between 3 to 6% per year, which would mean generally that your individual levy would go down over time to give us the same amount of money that we need to pay for all those things that we're asking for. So essentially what we're saying, again, is that the proposal would be to have a levy restoration in 23 for collection in 24, and an excess levy in 2024 for collection in 25. And let me talk a little bit. I mentioned the 4 scenarios we looked at that were revenue-based for staffing. And so to show what the impact would be, if you can go to the currently, with what we have today, with the tax levy of $1.20 per thousand, plus the fact that we're using some of our reserve money that we have set aside to help supplement our operating costs for the last year, this year, and next year. The result of that is 32 volunteers that we have, an average of 32, and 18 career staff. Currently, we are staffing both fire stations 88% of the time. It's not consistent staffing because we just don't have the people necessary to do that, both volunteer and career. Our average response time right now is 7 minutes and 17 seconds average. It will be obviously much higher the further away from the fire stations that you get. But the fact is, and what drives that number down a little bit, is the fact that most of our calls are down in this area and relatively close to either or both of the fire stations. I mentioned our capital asset replacement. It is fully funded still, and the plan is to keep that fully funded so that we can replace equipment in the future as we need. And as I mentioned, that levy rate is $1.20. So what we call Plan A is the plan that we're proposing that will consistently staff 2 fire stations. And to do that, we would go from a response staffing. We generally recognize that we'll probably have less volunteers. And for our planning assumptions, we're assuming that it would plateau, hopefully plateau at 25, where we can maintain a solid core of volunteers, at least 25. It would be nice if we can get more, and we will continue to work to do that. And we need to supplement from our current 18 career staff to 28, which would be the base staffing that we could count on and schedule and plan for at 2 different fire stations. By doing that, we can go from the 88% to, and I won't say 100%, it's not a guarantee, but pretty darn close to full-time staffing at 2 fire stations. That's what that would buy. And with doing that, and as we deploy our people, we could reduce our response times, which obviously will improve outcomes for the types of calls that we're responding to, from the 7.5 minutes that we currently have, from anywhere between 5.5 to 6 minutes. That's a substantial decrease in our response time, average response time. And then Plan A will allow us to keep our capital asset replacement fully funded, which, by the way, is a really good deal, because then we're not having to pay money on interest, we're not having to pay bond receipts or anything like that. It's, in fact, we just purchased a new replacement pumper, wrote a check for it, and it was close to $1 million for a brand new pumper. But we paid for it out of our reserve account that we have. And this example shows, and is a reflection of those numbers that you saw in the previous slide, but in 2024, if the voters approve the levy restoration, it would bump your annual or your levy rate to $1.50. If the citizens approve, or voters approve the excess levy, it would bump it to $1.95 for 25. And then, as it was shown on that other chart, that degrades a little bit over time as the overall growth in the assessed valuation in the district happens. So this is the plan that we're working towards. We have been working for it, and is the reason, again, why we're coming to the voters and the taxpayers to ask for additional funding so that we can achieve this plan. But we also looked at Plan B, which does not ask for that as much funding, understanding if you don't pay that much, you're not going to get as much either. So in Plan B, which still has a levy restoration, it still has an excess levy. The excess levy is considerably less than the other one in Plan A. But with Plan B, we could go from 32 again to the volunteers 25. But you see that we wouldn't be able to afford as many career staff. So we would have less career staff. And our coverage at 2 stations would be decreased substantially from the other proposal that we had. And so even with all of this, it's possible that after 2026 and in other ensuing years, it could even fall from this as well. So about the high water mark with Plan B would be staffing at both stations 90% of the time, which is fairly close to what we're doing now. Average response times would be 6.5 minutes to 7 minutes, about what we're doing now. Not quite as good as Plan A, obviously, but also because of the fixed funding that we would have, you can also see that these numbers could and probably would increase over time as our budget deteriorated, just like it has done in the last 3 to 4 years. Our capital asset replacement fund would be in jeopardy because we'd have to start taking money that we'd normally put into this and paying for other things, operations maintenance, labor, and all those sorts of things. So our capital asset replacement could be at risk. And as you can see, the levy rates, other than for 24, are significantly less than they were in Plan A. Again, pay less, you get less. Then we have a Plan C, which basically says if the voters approved a levy restoration this year, and we could collect that for 24, we're at $1.50 again. But this does not include an excess levy. This is assuming that we don't have one. Either we tried it and it failed, but this would be the result. Again, we're trying to maintain the base of 25 volunteers, but we go down to 20 or less career staff, again, because there's less money to pay for them. And it's almost certain, again, after 27, unless there's additional funding somehow made, that number will decrease as we have less money to pay for salaries and benefits for career staff. You can see that the percentage of the time that we can staff 2 fire stations is significantly less, and there are probable decreases down the line, 2 or 3 years down the line. The average response times from 8 minutes to 8.5 minutes. Again, significant increase from where we are today. And again, those probably would erode over the same period of time. But the levy rates, as you can see, they are diminishing and dropping an estimated 3 to 4% per year, and are frankly significantly less than Plan A or B. And then we have Plan D that we looked at, where there is no change in we don't get any additional funding at all. So again, we're assuming 25 volunteers, and because of that, we'd have to reduce our current staff significantly down to 11, possibly more over time. We can say that the ability to staff 2 stations would diminish quickly, and then probably after a year or 2, after 25 or 26, we'd have to consider just closing each station because there's no way of staffing at 2 stations. And then obviously that will affect the response times, and response times in excess of 10 minutes could be possible. Average staff for response time. We wouldn't have any money to replace equipment. We'd either have to not replace it or ask for general obligation bonds, which again are expensive. But we wouldn't be able to continue to fund that fund. And obviously you can see that the levy rates are significantly less. We would go from $1.20 that we have this year to $1.11 and then further degrade. So those are the 4 scenarios that we saw. Again, like I want to emphasize, these were staffing levels based on revenue streams. And so obviously, just like our main principle that we have is that the community decides the levels of service and they're involved with financial decisions. This is the result of making decisions like that. I'd like to close and then give us some time for questions. But again, the thing I really appreciate is the fact that we do, I believe, have great relationships with our community. We have for many, many years, both fire departments. And I think that even though we have evolved and changed a lot, I think we still have, and all of our members have, that same spirit of providing service they always have. And I think that that's an important thing, and that I really want to convey the fact that the district wants to be responsive to what the community thinks and feels about all this. So that's my pitch. I'd be glad to answer any questions. And we do have handouts, by the way, that cover some of this material. Yeah, Rich.
Brian, what is the current budget estimate, and then what would it be with the restoration, and what would it be with the excess levy? The 3 levels.
As far as the total money,
Yeah, just estimated. I mean,
well, our current budget is about, say, 4 million. And so it would go down if we didn't pass the levy.
right.
If we did, it would probably go up 11%, 10 to 11%. So it'd be like another 400,000. And then with the excess levy in 25, it would go up another 20%, 20 to 25%. Yes, ma'am.
And how would that be presented on the ballot, like the options?
No, the ballot measure that we will provide or propose, or we are proposing in 20 this fall, would simply, would you vote for the levy restoration or not? Yes, ma'am.
Oh,
And if it passed, our next step would be in next year, 2024, to do a similar ballot measure, say, would you approve an excess levy of X number? Yes or no?
That's probably good for people to know that that would be coming, so they aren't angry.
Well, that's I think is a part of being transparent and trying to show you, just like those charts did, to get to where we think we need to be to do a good service to the community is going to take place. And we might as well let you know that it's a 2-step process. So, yes, sir.
So this is our outreach of our community. So how are we gonna help that out? You know, what can we do, I guess, right?
Well, fortunately, we are recording this and it will be available on our website, and we want to get the word out. And so I think just raising interest and encouraging people to look into it and ask questions. We stand ready to answer them. You'll be getting some frequently asked question guides and some contact information, but essentially all of that points back to our website, which we have all the information on. It's easily accessible, and more than happy to come out and talk to anybody that wants to go too.
So
So
it's a great presentation. I mean, you know, I'm glad I came.
Well, I'm glad you did too.
So,
But it's a serious thing, and clearly it's, the citizens will receive the service level that we can afford. That's the bottom line.
And I think that chart is very helpful because in the past, even just for general elections for different services, it's not clear what has been asked for. So when you're saying per thousand, I think, that really helps people make the decision. Because I don't think the ballot measures for Olympia or other things are always clear on what it will mean to me.
We've been working on this for quite a while. I mean, this is not just something we thought up a month ago. I mean, we've been seriously working on this plan for 3 years already.
How will people get this? Will this chart be on the?
It will be on our website,
Okay.
and we will make sure if anybody wants one, we'll email it to them. I'll go out and deliver it. I mean, we're trying to get that word out. We're also, with our response crews, we're gonna develop a little brochure that they can hand to customers appropriately. I mean, it may not always be the right thing, but appropriately hand some information to our customers and give them that opportunity. But I would hope that people show an interest in this and get the information. I mean, we can't control how they will vote, but I think our mission is to try to give them as much information to help them make an educated decision one way or the other. So,
You still have a newsletter?
Yep. Our second quarter newsletter should be going out in a month or so.
So people will read that.
Well, I hope so.
Will it have that explanation on it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And we'll probably have other information that we'll send out in a variety of means. I mentioned earlier, our community outreach team, they're really beginning to exercise the social media stuff too, because not every, I'm not a social media person. I read stuff that comes to the house. Not everybody does that. So we're trying to get the information out as much as we can in a variety of ways that hopefully is reaching people so that they can read it and if they have questions that they can ask us.
We have a question online too.
Hi, Chief.
Hi.
A question, and maybe I missed it in the presentation. How does our response time compare to other districts, and especially the rural districts like East Olympia or, not so much Olympia and Lacey, but districts that are in similar geography to us? Are we way under response time or are we about in line? Any ideas on that?
Well, it's not really comparing apples to apples, but essentially, we're pretty darn good. And that was part of the work that we did in receiving a very good public protection classification from the WSRB. So 7.5 minutes is pretty good for the community that we have, the rural community responding from 2 fire stations. So I would say it's nothing to be ashamed of. So I'm frankly, I'm very pleased with it. I'd like it better, but again, this is what this is all about. So
Thanks.
does that answer your question?
Yep. Thank you.
No.
Kind of echoing Tom's question, in terms of comparing with other districts, we've talked about as a board, this looks like a pretty significant tax increase, but it's also, I think, important to look at it in the context of what other fire districts charge. Maybe you could just talk for a minute about how we compare it.
Well, I think that we compare pretty favorably. One, I would say most fire districts have some additional source of revenue, whether it's an EMS tax outside of Thurston County, general obligation bonds, or some form of excess levy. And so we're certainly at the bottom half of the levy rate match with other districts, if you will. I think a big piece of that is the fact that we're not relying heavily on general obligation bonds. And until our proposal now, we haven't relied on anything other than our base property tax. So $1.50 levy rate is kind of the benchmark, but more and more departments are exceeding that with other forms of funding.
So it's not unusual at all. Right?
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Yes, sir.
Will this allow the district to build back up the reserve?
I hope so. Yeah, I would tell you that plans B and C and D will not. It will eliminate it.
Well, maybe a good place to do is take these handouts and post them at like Go Harbor Merc, the Marina, 2 stores across the street, and have a stack there that people can take besides posting it on their bulletin boards. Because a lot of traffic goes through those places.
We're fortunate today that the chair of our community outreach team is sitting here, Drew Bonzer, and he's been taking notes and everything. So that's exactly the sorts of things that we have wanted the community outreach team to do, not just for, obviously not for just this ballot measure, but for everything as far as proactive education and prevention types of measures as well. So that we can certainly do that. Yeah. Okay. Is there any other questions?
And this takes just a general, is it a majority? I don't remember now. Is it a majority or
Levy?
60%?
A levy restoration, what we're asking for in this fall is 50% plus 1 vote. It's simple. The excess levy is more complicated. It requires a 60% approval with a supermajority. And again, we understand that and we'll explain it at the appropriate time if we hopefully can get that far, but it's a little more difficult. But again, it's that additional revenue that we feel that we need to do those things to accomplish Plan A. So. Anything else? Anything from the Ethernet?
All right, I want to thank the folks, those of you who came this evening, and the folks online. Really appreciate the participation. Your point about getting the word out and getting people to understand this, very well made, and we'll be working on that. I mean, all of us as citizens who live in the district have that opportunity to help kind of spread that word a little bit. The district is going to be providing information. They have a single sheet here, which is sort of frequently asked questions. It kind of gets things started, and it might help, if you want to talk to your neighbors, to have several copies of this and be able to hand it out to them. And then, of course, it's going to generate more questions, which then can rightly so come back to the department itself for more thorough explanations, knowing that these are just, simple, straightforward answers.
Are you going to try this again, maybe closer to the election time? Another community gathering?
Probably, yeah.
Seems everybody's watching baseball. Yeah.
It'll always be something. But yeah, again, this was more or less a travel in that we wanted to do, but do it early enough so that we could begin at least to get the word out. Hopefully build some momentum.
Just off the cuff, looking at the future and getting rid of gasoline engines and electric stuff, do they have any fire service vehicles that are electric?
Well, there are, it's frankly, it's fraught with a whole bunch of issues. In fact, we're worried now on how we effectively extinguish an electric car fire, to be honest. It's very difficult. And if it becomes a new trend, yes, it will make a substantial change in how we do things and what it will take to do it. So
Just surround and contain.
or let it go. I mean, just try to keep it in the same zip code, but it is a difficult issue. And by the way, the cost of a electric pumper is, the one that we bought was $1 million. They're at $2.5 to $3 million a piece for electric pumpers. So we probably won't be buying one for a while.
All right, any other questions? Again, thank you all for coming. And with that, I'll call the meeting to adjourn.
Thank you, Chief.
Don't leave without grabbing a bunch of vegetables and cookies.